When we speak of a cinematic canon, few countries stand out as having such an extraordinary cinematic history as Japan. Japanese cinema is both respected by cultural institutions and sanctified by the public's eye, while remaining extremely adventurous and transgressive in its practices. And although I'll be naming several films that compose the Japanese cinematic canon, it would be foolish to try to compose some form of definitive list. Rather, this is a retrospective and celebration of what makes Japanese cinema great, and how we can learn from its heightened aesthetic sensibility, one that is ever so inspiring and unique. This is a nod to filmmakers and storytellers of the country that brought us Rashomon's destruction of morality to kaleidoscopic storytelling. The Sword of Doom brutal portrayal of a swordsman's descent into madness and despair. The story of the last chrysanthemum's heartbreaking quietude. Shoplifter's delicate realism, and Doll's tale of loneliness in modern Japanese society. For Japanese cinema can truly be anything it wants. It can be the tender observation of Ozu's Tokyo Story, the poetic rhapsody of Kurosawa's dreams, the harrowing feminine gaze of Videophobia, or the Jidaigeki sensibility of Humanity and Paper Balloons. There is space for all thematics, from the serious to the absurd, from the common to the sublime.
What aspect stands out the most of your favourite artwork? Is it the general aesthetic, the underlying message, the context in which the artist created it? All art has a defining characteristic. If you're on this channel, chances are you can recognise it. But could that vision ever impact your daily life? For example, in 1982, a Basquiat painting was bought for $20,900. In 2017, that painting would sell for $110 million. This is why I'm excited to introduce our sponsor, Masterworks. Investing in one form or another has become a necessity in today's economy, so why not invest in a market you already know and love? Masterworks is an award-winning investment platform that allows you to invest in shares of contemporary art. Today's world has made it a tough time for traditional investors. Many markets are in the midst of a major collapse, but the art market has been resilient, and this isn't a mere coincidence. Contemporary art prices have outpaced the S&P 500 by 131% over the last 26 years. We've always championed the importance and value of fine art, and we're not alone. For decades, many of the world's great art collections have been curated knowingly as an investment, for the value of a masterpiece can transcend time and place. With Masterworks, you can choose from many of your favourite artists like Picasso, Banksy, Kaws, and potentially reap the benefits if their work appreciates in value. We probably won't be able to hang an authentic Basquiat on our wall, but we can find an investment and make the conversation about the art. Over their last 6 exits, Masterworks have given their investors an average of 29% net returns. Offerings have sold out as quickly as 14 minutes, and new members are signing up every day. Over 500,000 so far, and the demand is only growing. The Cinemacartography subscribers can skip the waitlist at the special link in the description.
It is only fitting to start this retrospective by talking about the genre that launched Japanese cinema to the forefront of Western sensibilities. Jidaigeki, or period dramas, were made even more popular by its subgenre of the samurai film. From the dialogue artistry of Harakiri to the extreme tense samurai rebellion, the genre was once the overpowering force of Japan's cinematic output in the West. In Seven Samurai, Kurosawa transcends the genre and crafts a samurai movie that, although anchored in ancient Japanese tradition, argues for a humanistic approach that goes beyond any rigid truth. Here, the characters go through the motions of their social obligations, and much like in a Greek tragedy, they perform the roles they have been assigned. The samurai perseveres, but so do the bandits. They perform a manner of masochistic tenacity that reflects a complex system of social codes unique to Japanese traditions. Following Kurosawa's steps is Fires on the Plain by Kon Ichikawa. Gruesome in its message yet poetic in its delivery, Ichikawa crafts quiet visual realism on the loud realities of war and destruction. A film-made masterpiece by its details, the landscapes that seem unravaged by the war carnage, a dying soldier wandering through desolate villages. Here, dynamic action stands in contrast to long, sustained scenes of pure silence. In the same visual philosophy stands The Naked Island. With almost no spoken dialogue, Kaneto Shindo puts all the weight of the film's storytelling on the impact of his visual language. The masterful score by avant-garde composer Hikaru Hayashi adds an overall meditative effect to the experience. Set against a backdrop of extreme poverty, the images become almost transcendental as we follow this small family life in the stunning landscapes of Seto Island Sea. Shindo's persistent interest is in depicting the solitary life of man in relation to the extreme surroundings. This strong dichotomy highlights what is the most precious at the root of our existence and is a core Japanese Shintoist philosophy. To be fully alive is to have an aesthetic perception of life, because a major part of the world's goodness lies in its often unspeakable beauty. Another rich and sensorial experience done masterfully on film is The Ballad of Narayama by director Keisuke Kinoshita. Grounded in deliberate artifice, it uses an elaborate set and a kabuki-like theatricality to underline the script's dramatic way. Engulfed by the blood-red sky and the mountain's mists, it tells a story of both profound beauty and startling cruelty, one impossible to look away from. In the same cinematic spirit is the groundbreaking Vermilion Souls. A surrealist tale, Vermilion Souls plays in the manner of a perceptual experience. As a result, the characters feel trapped in time, and in this space of extreme ambiguity, the film descends into a dream within a dream within a dream. The interplay between the limits of reality and illusion can also be found in the experimental documentary Throw Away Your Books, Rally in the Streets by Shuji Terayama. Here the mixture of visual elements at play creates an intense depth. This is the epitome of the Japanese New Wave. It hides behind nothing, as it portrays a vision that is both idealistic and vulgar, repentant and arrogant. And because in both Shinto and Buddhist traditions, life is seen as a balance of good and evil, with both necessary to sustain life itself, there's also considerably more space in Japanese cinema for moral ambiguity. This is clear in The Life of Oharu and Otamaro and His Five Women, both films by the legendary director Kenji Mizoguchi. Both are carefully crafted films, filled with fantastic sweeping shots and great attention to historical accuracy. But what makes them stand out goes beyond mere technical ability. They do so by evoking a transcendental gaze, evident in both their narrative scope and visual representation. Here, Mizoguchi transcends classics like Orochi and Crossroads, predilecting a more subdued, carefully considered undertone. Much like in Akira Kurosawa's final epic run, the visual technique is what structures the viewer's basic interpretation of the work. The content of the image and the resources of montage and mise-en-scène impose a world of deep meaning that functions beyond the surface of dialogue and plot. There's a visual control of every shot, every image carefully crafted for the utmost visual impact in both action and dialogue sequences. On a first level, the details of visual storytelling help set the scene, creating the atmosphere for the action to take place. And on a secondary level, the film image and aesthetic holds connotative meanings that work in the service of greater themes and ideas within the plot. This heavy emphasis on aesthetics is what also elevates Female Convict Scorpion Jailhouse 41 by Ito Shunya and Farewell to the Ark by Terayama Shuji. Here, color serves as a thematic device, a way of externalizing the characters' inner conflicts amongst the chaos of their surroundings. The image alludes to the inner works of Mitas, and the intrinsic melodrama of the film score's story is reflected in every imagetic decision. What fascinates me about Japanese cinema is that it always redefines the imagetic and reinvents film grammar. It does that through total inversion of perception. Undo by Shunji Iwai highlights all that is impermanent and incomplete in the portrayal of a perverse dance between obsessive lovers. The camera circles around their bodies as an almost organic presence. We watch as every material element in the room slowly disappears, and the space becomes an abstract representation of the couple's fragmented psyche. There's a strange emptiness in the way this film is shot. It stands in almost complete opposition to Love Exposure, A Funeral Parade of Roses, in their depiction of love and identity. Here, there is a chaotic exploration of the boundaries of love and the expressions of oneself. The rapid pace makes the frame composition feel playful, graphic, and more matter-of-fact than poetic. A Snake of June has the same psychosexual energy. Tinted in blue monochrome as a contrast to Pinko films, this is Shinya Tsukamoto's tour de force. He explores self-destructive sexuality and repression, disrupting the most familiar iconography into an explosion of evocative metaphors. The result is a sense-assaulting psychological venture into pure aesthetic storytelling. There's a self-contained visual grammar within the story. The rain, the camera flashes, the woman. The mechanics of the story only work within the confinements of the film. In Woman in the Dunes by Hiroshi Teshigahara, this becomes even more expressive. The visual metaphors crafted here are both erotic and hopeless. The cinematography creates a tangible texture of sand, of skin, of sweat, reaching the borders of the sensorial and the elusive. The same can be said by August in the Water. Half sci-fi, half cosmic dreamscape, it creates an otherworldly atmosphere while using only elements of the real world. It does that by adjusting its tone. Everything here is slowed down. Characters move like in a trance, the soundtrack is deeply immersive, and there's an amateur quality in the cinematography that grants sincerity to the film. Much like in Grass Labyrinth, there's a strong sense of liminality. Characters that transition in between periods of their life, so spaces feel impermanent and encounters feel heavier. Japanese cinema often navigates the extremes between secular humanism, which often represents the individual capacity for self-cultivation and improvement, and a type of higaisha ishiki, or victimization, portraying the individual as the wronged one. In The Human Condition by Masaki Kobayashi, this dichotomy is evident. A humanist drama at its core, the film is a raw indictment of Japan's wartime frame of mind. Shot in stark black and white, the cinematography feels rigorous. The punctuated tracking shots and the careful use of natural light transpire discipline to the storytelling. In almost aesthetic opposition is Mizoguchi's Sancho the Bailiff, which portrays an epic journey that transcends space and time. Here, there's no absolute beginning and end. Human life is a journey constantly metamorphosing, changing, and flowing between our interactions with each other and nature. This same elemental approach to human interaction came to influence Eureka by Shinji Aoyama. Shot first in color, to later be desaturated to acquire a sepia tint, the film feels like a bleak memory. It unfolds slowly, characters feel affectionless, and compositions come off as dreamlike. Much like Silence Has No Wings by Kazuo Kuroki, it relies heavily on its visual language to create emotional effects and keep us invested. Here, the frame is engulfed in darkness. In both story and form, the film is suggesting a backdrop of melancholia that further emphasizes the nuances of the story. This poetic realism framework vividly delineates the film's core concepts, articulating both the humanistic and transcendental qualities of the screenplay. The sensibility of the screenplay is matched only by the film's visual narrative. The image and story work in unison. In Linda, 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 the image of the film might be deceptively simple. The story flows much as a slice-of-life anime, and there's no extreme visual symbolism, just the poetic reality of life itself. In a similar vein is the hilarious Tampopo. Both films are testaments of the power of a more subdued visual narrative, one that doesn't intrude on the story, but parallels every single idea delivered by the script. Cinematography is an easy element to spot when done well. Everyone recognizes the expressive impact of beauty, but the skill in capturing an image that is altogether beautiful and fragile, that's a master's touch. In Nobody Knows and in Like Father, Like Son, Koreeda does exactly that. He patiently tracks his subjects up close, lingering on details, highlighting the importance of every gesture between parent and child. Every moment feels tender, and the harrowing melancholy of the story is accentuated by the slow burn beauty of the cinematography choices. In a similar vein is The Heartbreaking Muddy River, a haunting portrait of childhood innocence and friendship in post-war Japan. Translating the ephemera of life into pale realism is Tokyo Sonata. In this underrated masterpiece, Kiyoshi Kurosawa translates his experience as a horror director into the dynamics of a family drama. Shot starkly, it transgresses his uncanny sensibility, exposing the underlying hypocrisies of Japanese modern familiar structures. Shot in the same rigor is Kusano's Domains, a film that deconstructs a murder story through a series of stage readings and rehearsals. An innovative take on acting and exploration of the limits of filmmaking, Domains put into question the elements that compose cinema, and above all, asks the audience to rethink the structures of reality itself.
台風の目から再び低気圧の中に入ったことを感じ取って、すぐに家へ引き返そうとしました。ですが、彼女は一向に橋の欄干から動こうとしません。
For Japanese cinema often deals in the realms of secret, touching upon the familiar conventions of its hyper-hierarchical society, exposing the ambivalence of truth. The tour de force of cinematique macabre, cured by Kiyoshi Kurosawa, proposes a very deceptively simple structure. A series of murders are occurring around Japan, with an axe left behind at every crime scene. The killer is always a different, very ordinary citizen, but they all share one commonality: nobody remembers committing the crime. What unfolds is a masterpiece of psychological thriller, bridging the gaps between the cold investigative film genre and the alluring universe of the uncanny. Kurosawa achieves this by creating a strong contrast between spaces and characters. Everywhere feels empty, the town feels inhabited, the building structures feel worn out. This grants the film a suspended-in-time aesthetic. His exactness in every frame allows for the underlying metaphysical thematics of the film to truly shine. The result is a longing that lingers within the story. It calls to mind Angel Zag's relentless pacing, the story happening somewhere between symbolism and aesthetic splendor, the opaque style world building too beautiful to ignore. Here, technical skill is an easy thing to notice, and the images we are presented with are some of the most alluring and memorable that you can find throughout the entirety of cinema. And this comes precisely with Oshii is achieving a mode of storytelling where there are no barriers to creativity, where symbols are pouring out of him. A girl carries an egg through a wasteland, or maybe it's a purgatory, or maybe she didn't choose to carry it at all. The bottom line is that within Japanese cinema, one can find some of the most rule-breaking, mind-bending, otherworldly, but still incredibly sensitive and poetic narratives. The pathos of things, mono no aware, that's the aesthetic sensibility that allows for that. The awareness of what is transient in life, what it means to be vulnerable, or even anxious when confronted with the splendors and horrors of life. In Katatsumori, the poetic sensibility of Naomi Kawase takes the form of an experimental documentary following her relationship with her grandmother. Here, we follow the simplicity of everyday routine. The rawness and fragility of the home video format cut past the mundane, revealing the beauty of each passing moment, one that lies within life itself. But while Japanese cinematic sensibility reveals the fragility of ephemera, it also triggers an awareness of the metaphysical. Ugetsu by the great Kenji Mizoguchi is a revelation of pure sublime sensitivity. Here, the mood is the cinematic language. Mizoguchi utilizes his classic scroll shots, named so for the way they pan through the landscape, unfolding like a traditional Japanese scroll illustration. The ghostly presence of femininity seems to consume everything. Lady Wakasa feels distant and unfamiliar. She represents the deepest desires of an unfulfilled man, and it's not by accident that she is often portrayed as hiding by veils, in a half-presence that calls to mind the heroines of Japanese Noh theater. The haze of the imagetic landscape alludes to a world beyond the physical. Similar is to sleep so as to dream. where the intricate production design and the dreamy black and white photography grants this strange feeling of being in a hazy dream. Nostalgic in nature, it alludes to classic noir cinema, but with an avant-garde touch that takes the story to a complete new direction, one of strange, sublime fantasy. In The Taste of Tea by Katsuhito Ishii, the Yugen sublime takes the form of surrealist, absurd humor. There's a not-so-discreet visual poetry in his majestic choices that unveil a world beyond materiality, between the silly and the mundane. In a completely different direction, Tale of Iya represents a meditation on the beautiful landscapes of countryside Japan. Intense and sometimes radical in its visual storytelling, here all meaning flows from the process of life itself and the ever-changing powerful forces of the landscape. There's no traditional narrative or build-up in climax. Rather, the camera expresses the vastness of nature in contrast with the small melodrama of the human condition. Dealing in the realms of the humanist sublime is also Children of Hiroshima, a fictionalized war drama based upon real-life testimonies of survivors of the atomic bombing. Much like Children of the Beehive, it puts people at the forefront of its message, choosing to focus on the destruction of private life as a consequence of the horrors of war. The same can be said about the solemn aesthetic choices of the devastating The Burmese Heart. Here, images are not made to be easily digested, but to be deeply felt. Akin to, like grains of sand, Hashiguchi creates a microcosm where characters exist in the service of themselves only. Sublime poetry can also show itself through thematics that are less all-encompassing than war, but that scar us much the same. In Departure's depictions of the complexities of life and death traditions, we are invited to ponder on the meaning of life. Nothing is forever. People will come and go, and our finite existence is but a microscopic drop of water compared to the vastness of the universe. This meditative sensibility on the dilemmas of life is one that owes a lot to Yasujiro Ozu. It's impossible to speak of the sublime without speaking of his portrayal of human fragility. Ozu is never too sentimental, never too ornamental. The solemn aesthetic adopted is one of cinematography in the service of deep storytelling. Ozu finds poetry in the simple gestures of human interaction, in the forces that govern the human condition. His compassion towards the details of personhood is arguably the strength of his work and one that marked Japanese cinematic history. In counterpart, a heightened aesthetic sensibility grants Japanese filmmakers the ability to be fine-tuned to the grotesque and the gruesome. They understand that we all enjoy beauty, but an appreciation of ugliness is necessary to magnify this process. The beauty and the ugly are not opposites, but different aspects of the same thing. Tetsuo the Iron Man by Shinya Tsukamoto is a 60mm delirium of industrial body horror. The fast-paced editing and the stop-motion animation help create a fever dream of metal fetishism and mega violence that is reminiscent of 80s mecha anime. This techno-industrial madness owes a lot to the post-humanist subversions of Akira. Otomo's allegorical approach characterizes the monstrosity in Tetsuo. His metamorphosis into a post-human creature is shown as a way to subvert what we take as most precious, the private, internal space of the flesh, our identities. In 964 Pinocchio, the same cyberpunk energy takes a more radical approach. The corporeal horror of having your body violated and infused with technology. A cybernetic organism, a hybrid of machine and biology, metal and flesh. As a means of contrast with the sublime, the grotesque and the ugly becomes the richest source that nature can offer. And Japanese cinema is unafraid to showcase exactly that. In Visitor Q by Takashi Miike, ugliness is the sole storytelling device. Here there are no metaphors, just a DV camera capturing obscene and gloriously repulsive cinema. This same low-budget guerrilla approach is what Sion Sono relishes in Tsuchimi. At first glance, this looks like an amateur project, but this is a misconception. This film is full of Sono's social commentary and his poetic lowbrow symbolism. Violence, gruesome encounters, and the possibilities of body horror. Always fair play to Japanese cinema. In Sonatine, this visceral energy is put to test. Here Takeshi Kitano crafts an evocative tapestry of violence, absurdity, and nihilism. He mixes genres, traversing freely between comedy, drama, and action. Much like it does in Hanabi, violence is a backdrop of human connection. The aesthetic experience of violence here is one with an end in itself. Different from Ichi the Killer or the Battles Without Honor in Humanity saga, here the experimentations with cinematic form are a reflection of the film's extreme message. The screenplay is intense, and so is the filmic grammar. But when the grotesque isn't enough, Japanese cinema might also present its extremities in more unusual shapes. To Westerners, the dreamscapes of weird Japanese cinema are attractive because they present total anarchization of the classical structures of filmmaking. In Obayashi Nobuhiko's masterpiece, Hauzu, there are no rules. Cinema here favors the joys of experimentation, creating an amalgamation of cinematic techniques. From animation to collage, Hauzu subverts visual form and storytelling. In Pastoral To Die in the Country, avant-garde director Terayama uses artifice to create and maintain mood. He explores cinematic unreality, weaving the hyper-cinematic through a dense and dazzling visual experience infused by high-concept ideas. It calls to mind the destructive obsessions of Audition, where the story is told through the fragmentation of both the character's memory and the visual language. This dichotomy is also present in Heroic Purgatory, a film as beautiful as it is eerie. As a conceptual proposition, Heroic Purgatory was designed to be a visual experience not meant to be explained by the rational mind. At its core, this is a non-narrative film, but the mastery here is that it never reaches surrealist territories. Instead, the film lives in a limbo between the psychological and the symbolic. The camera is always tilted, looking up to indicate that nothing terrain is happening. Characters are captured in relation to the aerial space, and a heavy emphasis is placed on what lies above us, whether that be the encasement of a ceiling or the openness of the sky. In tone, the brutalist composition creates a haunting sensorial encounter between reality and imagination. Akin is the face of another, where the uncanny iconography of the mask unveils the endless cycle between identity creation and self-destruction. And it's this contrast between the phantasmatic and the monotonous that creates the visual tensions of much of Japanese cinema we come to revere here in the West. The multiple dream sequences in Paprika, for example, serve to document the power of animation and to dwell into a dangerous fantasy, where aesthetic transcends the emotional outcomes of the script. From the nonsensical visual vulgarities of splatterpunk cinema to the psychedelic realism of the contemporary anime landscape, Japanese cinema cemented itself as a cinema of profound inventiveness, one that transcends its nation appreciation into the top echelon of global cinematic history.